Spring transfer portal craziness is continuing, and UCF is involved in a bunch of big-time names. What do we think about the names that are being linked to UCF, and who is going to be a Knight within the next couple weeks? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Charge On. As always, I'm your host, Sean Green. Before we get started, as always, a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL playoff stats. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Back-to-back weeks where my setup is just a tad different. Last week it was Orlando Magic. This week in a random office. Next week I'll also be in a different location. I'll be on a cruise, so we're still doing content on vacation, shows dedication. I'm an athlete. I think Nick might disagree, but I put in the work, and to be honest, there's so much to talk about right now specifically that I really can't take any time off because UCF is involved in literally every single big name that you could think of, and we're going to get to it, but Nick Geddes joins me back-to-back weeks. That's what you call a streak in the sports world, Nick, and we're going to try and continue that. But Nick, kind of crazy week so far. I mean, it's Friday now, but again, it seems like every single day there was some name getting dropped that is visiting UCF. UCF is interested, and we'll get into the big names, like I keep saying. But this was one of the more it shouldn't shock us anymore, but this was one of the more shocking weeks that I can remember in a while when it comes to players being interested in UCF.
Yeah, who the hell was donating NIL money this
not me.
This past couple weeks? Who the hell? Somebody actually don't tell anybody. Keep that under wraps. But yeah, you've been saying all this time during the offseason there was like not much to talk about and it was kind of dead. And now UCF is like really at the center of so much that's going on in the portal world right now. I mean, and listen, regardless if they end up getting all these guys and we're going to go through them, I think it's still cool as hell that, they're going big game hunting. They're right there. I still think it's cool every time you see like the Hayes Fawcett from On3, the graphic thing that he always does, which is just phenomenal. And you see the UCF logo next to logos like Georgia and some of these big schools like they're in play. Like, along with these big schools to get some of these bigger names that are in the portal. And, we'll break them down now and see the chances of them landing them. But it definitely has provided some excitement here, I guess, at a time where there's usually not much. But that's the spring transfer portal for you.
Yeah, and we had a lot of transfers come in that fall cycle, like right after the season. Transfer portal opens up and, UCF added a lot of players. And you saw, like, if you guys went to the spring game, a lot of those transfer players were kind of in the first or second team. Now, if we go back to last year, Nick, we spent weeks, months, episodes talking about the guys that UCF brought in. And like, oh, these guys are going to make an immediate impact. They're going to be starters. Like, the big one was Ryan Davis. We're like, oh, Georgia linebacker, didn't get a lot of playing time at Georgia. You're thinking he's going to come in and start. And guy came in and barely played any snaps for the Knights. So with a lot of these transfers, I think this season specifically, in my opinion, it's going to be a complete 180. Just by the way that we're seeing kind of who is in the first team, new defensive coordinator in Ted Roof. That's, I think, crucial to note that it seems like they're going to play these transfers early on. And again, when we look at some of the transfers in the spring window, UCF hasn't lost a bunch of top key names. I think the only real key name that we continuously talk about, was Nakai Martinez. That was the biggest name that UCF lost. Besides that, UCF has done relatively well keeping all their top players. But, as we'll talk about today, in the transfer portal era, you can always get extra help. And you can always get guys that can make an impact on your team. And we're going to get into it. And again, most of you probably saw in the thumbnail, Cormani McLean's on there. We'll get to him in a second, right? Because I'm sure me and Nick both have opinions about that specific prospect coming to UCF. But the first player I want to get to, Nick, and we've talked about this a lot off air, because to be completely honest, if UCF actually got this prospect, it would be one of the biggest gets in program history from just a complete high school standpoint. Jason Zandamela, I talked about a little on Brandon's show that we would talk, or the UCF report on the Zone Heads podcast, and I said I'm saving it for Charge On, so we're talking about it right now. Jason Zandamela is by far the best prospect left in the transfer portal. Again, even if all the players were in the transfer portal and hadn't picked teams yet, Zandamela would be a top 10 prospect, probably the best offensive lineman there, and he's just out of high school. Straight out of high school, almost a 5-star prospect, went to USC for a couple months in the spring, decided I'm homesick, I want to come home. We'll get into it, but Nick, obviously, it would be huge if UCF could get him, right? There's a lot riding on the visits that he took the last couple days, or he took visits Tuesday and Wednesday, all day at UCF. Florida is still kind of a lingering team. Wouldn't shock me if he goes to Florida. But kind of talk about Zandamela a little bit and how huge this would be for maybe UCF fans that kind of rely on us for recruiting aspects, who maybe are like, oh, how big would this be? What would you compare this to in terms of, UCF getting a prospect like this?
Yeah, he would rank among, like, if you kind of put him in the high school type of ranking, which I personally am. You can call this transfer portal all you want, but he hasn't played it down in college football yet. He's in the 2024 class, so I consider it almost like a semi-high school recruit. This he would be one of the biggest gets in the history of the program. Borderline top 5 interior prospect in the On3 industry rating here in the class of 2024. So a lot of talent, like you had mentioned, from Clearwater, went to USC. Sounds like he's a little homesick, wants to be closer to home. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And I mean, this is one I feel confident about. I really do, because he seems to be spending a lot of time at UCF's campus. A lot of time. I think he has other meetings set up potentially. Don't know when Florida. I think Florida was trying to get him on their campus next week, I believe. So we'll see what happens there. How much money is going to play a role in this? You always have to factor that in. But yeah, this would be a tremendous get for UCF. It would be the biggest get in this portal for them by far, and they've already brought in some pretty heavy hitters. But this would be a different level. You get him in, and essentially he doesn't know anything because he was only at USC for a couple months. So You're basically starting with a fresh prospect that you can develop at your own rate. Doesn't have to play right away necessarily, but good to have in your program now. So, yeah, I think all signs are pointing up on this one, potentially for UCF to get him.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. I want to make it very clear to UCF fans that aren't aware of him. Again, Nick said 2024 class. That was the class that was just signed. Most of the class is like 50-50. They go either in the spring cycle where they early enroll, or they enroll in the fall. So in Jason's case, he went to USC, right? He went to USC for 2 months for the spring cycle, enrolled early, and decided right after the spring, I'm getting in the transfer portal. I want to go home. So that's why all the Florida schools are highly intriguing. It seems like Herb Hand is making a huge impact on this, which is, again, we can talk about the recruits that Herb Hand has landed over the last however many years that he's been at UCF, where he doesn't go necessarily after the highest ranked offensive lineman. He goes for guys that are really tough, are gritty. Again, doesn't matter about the stars, and we've always talked about it doesn't matter about the stars, but to go from getting Walt Claire Flynn in this last class, 2024, to potentially bring in a guy like Jason Zandamela would be huge for Herb Hand and the coaching staff. And again, Nick said it. He was on campus Tuesday and Thursday all day. I was told he was on campus all day, both days. And as of Wednesday at like 8, Wednesday at 9, there has not been a date or time or anything scheduled with Florida regarding Zandamela. Now, am I saying that is still going to be the case as of today? No. I highly I expect him to take a visit to Florida because, again, and Nick mentioned it, NIL is a huge factor in this. How much money can UCF pay this guy compared to Florida? They've already beat Florida for a bunch of, again, the John Walker stuff last offseason, right? John Walker flirted with the idea to go to Florida. He ended up going to UCF. So it's going to be really, how much is Florida going to pay? And realistically, how much does Jason want to be close to his close home? Like, Gainesville is a little bit farther away from Clearwater. UCF's closer by a couple hours. Does that play more of a factor as well? So there's a lot of factors in this. If UCF nabs him, he would be the biggest prospect in UCF history. Because I take the same boat as Nick. I'm not viewing him as a transfer. I'm viewing him as a high school prospect that went to USC for 2 months on a quick spring vacation and now is going to pick his actual school.
And also, too, if you're really not familiar with him, his story is incredible. He was originally from Mozambique, Africa, and played rugby, okay? Didn't even know what football was prior to coming to the United States in 2020. And for him to essentially jump into football like that with no prior knowledge, and within, 3 years of playing high school ball, it sounds like, I believe, turn himself into a top 100 player in the entire country. I mean, to me, I found that very incredible about his story. Obviously, he's a big dude. He's a damn good athlete as well. So there's just a lot to like there, and plenty of upside as well.
We will see what happens. It'll be a very intriguing thing if UCF can get him right now on 3. The percentage for UCF is 92.6%. For Florida, 7.4%. Again, we have no idea how accurate that is, if that's just, again, because he just took the visits to UCF. So we will keep you guys posted. I'm sure it's going to be, I don't want to say a quick process, but it seems like it's UCF and Florida that are the only 2 schools right now that he's really considering. So we'll let you guys know next week any updates. But let's move on to the one that me and Nick, clearly, maybe Nick, wants to talk about. Cormani McClain. This one's been a little bit of a roller coaster. And to be honest, anybody going to Colorado and playing for Dion, it seems like there's a roller coaster regardless. So this doesn't shock me. Cormani McClain got announced that, I guess, the first announcement was the schools that have contacted Cormani, which I think there was 12 Power 4 programs that had contacted him. Then it came out that not really any Power 4 schools are interested in Cormani just because of all the baggage. Then it got announced that the 3 schools that are kind of trending for Cormani are USF, UCF, and Memphis. Obviously, Memphis just got the $25 million over the next 5 years from, I think it's FedEx or whoever sponsors Memphis football. Is it FedEx, Nick? Do you know what I think it's FedEx.
The what?
Who sponsors Memphis's athletics? Some shipping company just gave Memphis $25 million that is going into NIL.
Well, don't they hold on. Don't they play? Yeah. I think their arena, or at least from the Grizzlies rather, is their FedEx Forum.
I might be right. Oh yeah,
that might make sense.
I had it right on the first. I think that's good to know. But again, you don't know how much money is getting shoveled out of, Memphis athletics now. But listen, Cormani McClain, for those of you who lived under a rock in the recruiting cycle in 2023, I think it was. I'll quickly click on his 2023. Number 1 ranked corner in the class, top 15 prospect. Chose his recruiting battle was quite interesting. I mean, if you remember, obviously Travis Hunter the year before was, committed to Florida State. Last day switched up, went to Jackson State. And then the year after, Cormani McClain was up. And it was highly assumed he would stay somewhat close to home. He's from Lakeland, and he would be going to Miami. That was kind of the safe assumption, but there was a lot of antics around his recruitment and how he kind of left people in the dark. I don't want to say non-professional because, in recruiting nowadays, it's like whatever, but switched up and went to Colorado to go play with Deion Sanders. And really ever since there, Nick, it's been not great. Deion Sanders has no problem talking down to his players or talking publicly about what he expects out of his players. He said Cormani's in his own way, basically, and, a bunch of rumors coming out about him missing class, missing workouts, being a diva. So it doesn't completely shock me that there's not many Power 4 schools interested in him. What is shocking is, to me, you could say he might have character issues. And I want to get your take on this, but you could say he has character issues. But how much of that is Coach Deion Sanders kind of just being different and maybe Cormani feeling, because call it like it is. Though I think Travis Hunter is a hard worker, you can just see it in his game, how much work he puts in. But there's antics with Deion Sanders. It's not the conventional way of college football. Travis Hunter is basically like a kid to Deion. So with Cormani, I'm sure Cormani saw that, and already coupled with maybe how he acts in general, it kind of blow up I'm Cormani McClain. I'm the number one corner in my class. I'm coming to Colorado. I can do what I want. And Deion kind of put him in his place a little bit, which maybe caused a little bit of friction and tension, which is now the reason he's in the portal. How much do you think it's Cormani, and how much do you think it is the situation he had at Colorado?
I'm certainly not as glued into the Colorado program. I think we all just kind of see these things on the outside, and Deion is a very divisive head coach, clearly, for the way that he runs things. The best way, it kind of comes off like a little bit of a circus, if I'm being completely honest, of how things are over there. There's all these rumors that he missed meetings and whatnot. True or not, I'm pretty sure that might fall sometimes on the head coach too. I think there's some give and take there, especially with a young player who's a freshman and everything. And so I'm hesitant to put it all on one. And Cormani, we already talked about the Deion comment last week about, he needs somebody to hold him accountable, and we weren't that program, all that stuff. And then Cormani had the fire back where he said he's looking to play for a real program, not one for clicks. So clearly it seems like there was some friction there, and it just wasn't a good fit. The talent of Cormani McClain, number one corner in his entire recruiting class in 2023, top 15 player. Clearly the talent is there. And I also found this interesting to the point about the missed meetings thing. One of his former high school coaches came out this week, Donta Peterson, and he said that he coached him from his freshman year to his junior year. And he mentioned it. He never missed a meeting. And again, this is high school, but he said he never missed a meeting, had pretty damn good grades. And as he put it here, he never got arrested, didn't fail a drug test, didn't put his hands on a female or anything like that. And yet he's being talked about like he's some ultra bad kid because he missed a meeting. So perspective definitely counts here a little bit. And I always subscribe to the theory of second chances. You shouldn't bury 100%. A young kid in this point who's 18, 19 years old for something like missing a meeting. It's just interesting, I guess, when you look at his recruitment at the moment. And I know he said he had heard from like 11 schools immediately, and some are the big ones, but the ones who are being talked about now are UCF, USF, and Memphis that seem to be really going in. It's just interesting that no other like of those big time programs are really pursuing him. So you question like, what do they know? Is there more to this story? Right? You
Yeah.
always have to run those questions through your head. But in the context of his recruitment, I think there was a report there that Memphis is open to allowing him to be a dual player and play receiver as well, which he did in high school. So how much of that matters to him? We have no idea what USF is doing down there. Just west of us, obviously, or actually, I'm in Tampa, so over here. But yeah, I mean, I would like to think that if UCF is going after him, that they've done extensive homework on him, and if they do meet with him, that they'll get the full scoop and the full story, and they'll feel confident about it. Because I don't think Gus willingly wants to let problems come into his program when there's so much good coming out of it right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. If you've done the homework and you feel confident that you could bring him in and it not change the program or not add any unnecessary drama, then I don't know why you wouldn't. I mean, like, again, he was the number one corner just a year ago, or 2 years if you're adding 2 class cycles. 2 years, a year, whatever. He clearly, I think, going to Colorado was a bad mistake. I think, again, it was a bad partnership. And again, I also take to the fact that second chances are crucial, especially in sports. I mean, a lot of time, like, depending on what the first offense is. But this doesn't seem like a fact of, he was doing something crazy out there. It seems like both Colorado and the players, which I think is kind of important, and then Cormani on the other end, Colorado's painting this picture of Cormani just wasn't good enough for the program and tried to act like he was and all this other antics. And Colorado's painting this picture that everybody wants to come to Colorado. You should see Shedeur Sanders' DMs because everybody wants to play here. And if you don't play here, you're not good enough. And I'm like, there's a lot of talk for a team that won how many games? 4 last year? 4 games? So, I mean, I'm sorry. And again, they post videos of Cormani getting beat and whatever. It's like, at the end of the day, he's a prospect. Not saying he's going to live up to his ranking or anything like that, but if UCF has a chance to bring him in,
no, but you're always
anything.
For what we talked about. Yeah, for what we talked about last week, when you have those star ratings, man,
don't matter.
They're a double-edged sword, and when you have that star rating and you're not too far removed from those star ratings, there's always going to be programs that are willing to take you in and see if they can make it work. That's just the way it goes.
100%. And again, we'll see. I don't know where UCF is in the clubhouse. I know that before the Auburn DBs, and we'll talk about one of the Auburn DBs because the other one kind of, he got out of the portal. He's going back to Auburn. But it was safe to assume that UCF would probably go after the Auburn guys over Cormani McClain. They've, been in college a couple of years. It was safe to assume that. I still think they'll go after Cormani, and again, we'll probably hear something over the next couple weeks. I would expect it to be a little bit longer than maybe a Jason Zandamela, because I think Cormani, there's a lot to unravel there. I think Cormani there's no visits on the books that we've heard about. There's only teams that are interested or whatever. So I think that's going to be a little bit longer. But again, I think if UCF is intrigued, if UCF wants him, there's no harm, especially in today's transfer portal age where you can enter the portal basically in 2 times a year, 3 times a year. It wouldn't shock me in the slightest if we have a couple weeks of waiting. But we'll see where he ends up. Let's shift over to a quarterback. I talked about this a little bit on the Zoneheads Orlando podcast, UCF report. Ja'Curry Brown. Now, this kind of lit up on UCF Twitter a little bit because he had a visit to UCF this week. And again, 6'4", 220. Miami fans, Nick, before they got Cam Ward, Miami fans felt that Mario Cristobal and staff were kind of giving this guy the short end of the stick. Miami fans wanted to see Ja'Cory Brown start. Miami fans wanted Brown to get an opportunity, stuck it out in Miami on the team, waiting for that opportunity. And it seemed like he was finally going to get it. They signed a couple transfer quarterbacks that were by no means automatic starters. So a lot of fans were assuming he was going to be the starter heading into next year. Well, then Cam Ward decided he's not going to enter the NFL draft and goes to Miami. And now Ja'Cory Brown enters the portal. Hasn't got a lot of playing time. If you look at his stats, he was never the starter, barely has any, experience starting for them. But again, when you look at a UCF type of quarterback, I said, Nick, this if he commits to UCF, which I don't know who else is interested. I'm sure there are other teams interested, but it's only been reported that he's been on a visit to UCF. If he committed to UCF, Gus Malzahn is getting another prototypical Cam Newton. I'm not calling him Cam Newton, but if he does come to UCF, he's sitting behind KJ Jefferson, another 6'4", 6'5" quarterback for a year. And then that makes the 2025 class or the 2025 quarterback competition highly interesting. But, talk about Ja'Cory Brown a little bit. Obviously, I'm not saying he's going to be a Knight, but from the information we've gathered, if he does come to UCF, what would that add to the quarterback room?
Yeah, first note about other schools that are interested. Steve Wiltfong at On3. It was Appalachian State, Baylor, Georgia State, Mississippi State, and UCF were the schools who were the most serious on him. Obviously, we know Mississippi State and Baylor both lost their starters to the portal, and Will Rogers and Blake Shapen. So there might be some opportunities. Baylor already brought in a transfer in Daquan Finn. So we'll see about those fits. But for UCF's sake, listen, Timmy was going to be the backup this year. I think we all would agree on that. And he exited the program. Now, Ja'Cory at least comes in with a guy who's been on a campus for 2 years. He's got some semi-experience. He's certainly, from a size standpoint, he's like 6'4", 220-ish, around there. So he's got really good size. He's really athletic, a dual threat, all those things. It seems like a prototypical Gus-type quarterback. So, it's not my biggest need necessary or anything like that, or I'm not prioritizing it over some of these other guys that we've been mentioning. But if you get him on your campus, cool. Not trying to downplay it or anything. But theoretically, they do need a backup quarterback who has some experience, and Ja'Cory would at least provide that. So I think that's where we're at right now with it.
My viewpoint is, again, heading into next year where there's a lot of uncertainty. You get KJ for 1 year. Next year, as of right now, you're having EJ Colson, Riley Trujillo, Dylan Risk. I think that's it as of right now. Those would be your guys in the quarterback room.
Provided they didn't jump back into the portal next year.
Oh, exactly. But which I don't think any of them would.
Depending on their confidence level in these guys.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, if you're bringing in a Ja'Cory Brown to compete, you could safely assume probably Dylan Risk would enter the portal, right?
Yeah.
But that would make it still like a wide open QB competition, but he would be the leader in the clubhouse. And it's, again, if he did come, he sits a year behind KJ and learns and really understands kind of some things, how he can use his size, stuff like that. So, again, not a need, but when you're looking ahead to 2025, where there is a lot of uncertainty at quarterback, and Gus has publicly said that you don't want to bring in a transfer quarterback every single year. You want to be able to sit and develop one. I think that's an important caveat. And again, we'll see what happens, and we'll see if they bring him in or if he commits. But I think it's crucial for the next year to have him sit behind a guy and have all the guys sit behind him, KJ, and learn, and whoever comes out in 2025, may the best man win. But to that, we'll go to a couple more names. I'm just going to mention these three. We're not really going to go in depth into all of them, but these are guys that UCF is in play for. Javarius Johnson, wide receiver out of Auburn, entered the portal. He's been kind of linked to UCF for a while as a guy that would not shock people if he went to UCF. He released his top 4. UCF is on there. We'll see if he commits to UCF. Again, the other guy, Tyler Williams, that we've been talking about for a couple weeks, he committed to Maryland. So he's off the board, which also makes it interesting for Cormani because they played together. We assumed they might want to go to the same school, but that's not happening. Colton Hood, again, another Auburn guy. As you know, UCF is Auburn transfer U because of Gus. But corner, 5'11", enter the portal. Again, UCF's going after DBs. This would be one that I think they also go after. And then another wide receiver just got announced yesterday, Jacoby Jones out of Ohio. He's another wide receiver. Going to visit UCF. UCF is interested. 6'2", a little bit of a bigger receiver. And according to On3, he's an 88 overall 3-star wide receiver for the portal. So, Nick, any of those names stand out to you?
Jacoby Jones. I know UCF, I think, likes their receiver room at the top, obviously with Kobe and Xavier. And we'll see what happens with a guy like Burdell, who has shined, and Gerard Baker, who they're excited about. But I think they could stand to add another experienced guy in the mix. And when I look at a guy like Jacoby Jones, I love the production in his first year at Ohio 2 years ago. 45 catches, 777 yards, and 6 scores. Got injured last year, so he only played in 3 games, I believe, for Ohio. But I do like, although it's a little bit of a smaller sample size, I like those numbers from the year prior. And I would be interested. I know he's visiting on Friday, so tomorrow, which we're recording here on Thursday, so he'll be on campus tomorrow. He probably sticks out to me of those guys the most because, I mean, the secondary, they've already brought in a good amount of talent there already. And, I think even some of the guys who were leaving, they were able to bring another guy in, obviously, and they've been able to patch that side up. But I do think that receiver room could use an influx of a receiver or two.
Yeah, and listen, I know Nigel Lee Kelly just committed. We're going to talk about everybody who ends. I think UCF only has about 7 scholarships remaining. So once we get the full list of who's transferring, all that, we'll do an episode on it and talk about them. But I agree. I know Michigan fans at least wanted Jacoby Jones. So again, if you can get a guy like that who can just, again, help your wide receiver room, add a little bit more depth, can potentially play this season, I think that's all crucial. And I think UCF's doing a good job of getting players again. Who knows if all these players will commit? At the end of the day, they're taking visits to UCF.
I do think it's clear. They are, and Gus already made this clear, but they see an opportunity to do something special this year. Once we get closer to the season start, I think I'll have more of a feel for how they sit in the conference. But I think Gus sees an opportunity to potentially win that conference this year, and he should. I want my head coach to feel that way, and it feels like through all the moves he's made, even going back to some of the changes he's made from a coaching standpoint and kind of shuffling the deck there a little bit, he seems to be, now it's year 4, he seems to be tired of waiting around for things to progress, I guess, in a slow burn type of way like it's kind of been, and he wants to see some substantial improvement this season. And so I think that's a big reason why they are exhausting a lot of effort into this portal right now.
And I'll say this, and we've said this because we cover the team, we see the moves that are made. You are crazy if you don't think all the Big 12 schools are taking notice as to what UCF is doing, not just in the recruiting aspect, but in the portal.
Yeah.
Like, if they go out and they steal a Jason Zandamela from the portal, no offense, I think the only other Big 12 school that would do something like that right now is at Texas Tech. UCF is in a prime location. We've talked about it. We've beaten it with the dead horse. These type of names that UCF is going after, and again, a school can go after a guy, but at the end of the day, there has to be a mutual partnership of, I am interested in your school just as much as you're interested in me. And it seems like these top-tier transfer recruits or prospects are very intrigued at UCF. So, again, it'll come down to how much is NIL a factor? Is UCF clearly doing really good in NIL? I'll be honest, if they get a guy like Jason Zandamela, then we have to really think how much money is UCF getting in the NIL fund, which it might be a good amount because there's no way you can keep all these players around and sell them on the fact that, well, you're in Florida. Because there are 3 other Florida schools that would be willing to pay a lot more money for our top guys. And again, Florida wants this guy. A bunch of people want a lot of these players. Michigan wants Jacoby Jones. So we'll see where it goes from here. And again, we'll talk about it. If Jason Zandamela commits, we might do an emergency pod. Hopefully I'm not on the cruise when that happens. But all we can say is I agree with Nick and what Nick is saying in the sense of the Big 12 is UCF's, in my opinion, the Big 12, not necessarily this season, but we've continued talked about, is there a team that is primed and ready to kind of take over the Big 12? And I think UCF is at the top of that list when you add everything into it. Not so much this season, even though I do agree with Nick that UCF is, I think Gus is wanting to win this. But
yeah, I mean, I would say on the surface, like Kansas State looks formidable, of course.
Yeah.
Especially with Avery Johnson now, because I think he's better than Will Howard. Just being honest.
I might agree with you.
I don't understand how Will Howard goes to Ohio State and now there's all this Heisman hype on him when it was that's more about I think what's on his helmet than anything.
Yep.
But yeah, and also they're big in on Dylan Edwards, the Colorado running back, and then Utah with Rising coming back is going to be tough.
Oh yeah,
know that. So it's not like UCF's like I would say UCF though at the moment. Again, I'll have more of a feel by the time we get to the fall, but I don't think it's unreasonable to say they're in that 4 or 5 range potentially of contenders right now.
This year,
for this year,
I'm saying if we go 5 years down the line. And I'm not saying team-wise. I'm just saying if you're talking about when you say the Big 12, who's the first team you say?
Oh, yeah.
I'm saying in 5 years.
They have a chance to out-recruit almost everybody in this conference year in and year out. I don't think that's a homer statement or anything to make.
No, and I think and that's what I'm saying. I think every Big 12 school would probably agree with you and say we wouldn't, not saying teams won't want the smoke, because I think, again, as of right now where UCF is, I think it's pretty even. I would agree, probably 4th or 5th in the Big 12. Recruiting-wise, in 5 years, UCF is already competing with the Florida States, the Floridas. Again, they're better than those schools right now in the rankings. Not saying that will stick, but as of right now, in April, UCF is the best Florida team when it comes to recruiting. The question is going to be, how much can they... I get Florida State, I understand. But how can you keep that?
Even Miami right now, I mean, I'm not going to deny what they're doing from a recruiting standpoint.
What's their...
Miami was in the top... Miami was in the top... what were they, like 4 or something in this past recruiting cycle?
I'm going to look at team rankings. Well, yes, in the you're looking at it from the 2020.
They were 5. Yeah, I'm just saying from current standpoint in 2020.
As of right now, UCF 5. In Florida... UCF in the 2025 rankings has a better recruiting place than Miami, Florida State, and Florida.
Yeah. In 2025 they do.
Yeah, but that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm going for. I'm not saying.
Well, actually, not really. I pulled it up here. I'm sorry. I'm checking your work here on the live.
I have
2025 ranking currently from On3 is Florida State's 10. Miami is listed at 15 and UCF is at 20 at the moment.
See, on
Florida's at 22.
It's okay.
Florida's at 22.
Okay. Well,
okay.
247.
We'll say it like this: is the gap shrinking maybe a little bit? Sure.
Yeah. All right, we can leave it at that. All right, Nick. Any final words before we close out this episode?
Crossing my fingers for Jason Zandamela. I really want that one to happen. I think it should, and I think it will take precedence over any other player that they're going to bring in for visits and that they're interested in. So hopefully that gets done sooner rather than later. And that would be a big one to beat out Florida as well.
That'd be a big boom. That'd probably be the biggest boom in the last 4 years for Gus Malzahn and staff.
Yeah.
But All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that you do. We greatly appreciate it. Again, we'll see what happens, but we're highly excited and intrigued to see who would be joining the Knights next. Coming to you back again. Also, if you haven't already, please check out the UCF Report on Tuesdays over on the Zone Heads Orlando podcast channel. We talk about all UCF sports, not just football over there, so go check that out. All right, everybody, this has been Charge On, presented by BetOnline. We will see you next week.